headquarters in Northern California and began shooting up the place. We are not going to mention her name, as I say, because here at the Daily Wire and on my podcast in particular, I have a policy. My policy is that we don't mention the names of attempted mass shooters because studies tend to show that when you glorify mass shooters, all that does is create copycats. People want to think that their message is getting out there. So what we will discuss is everything we know about this woman without actually mentioning her specific name, just what you need to know as news consumers. So according to Mercury News in San Jose, the night before this woman opened fire in a courtyard at YouTube's headquarters Tuesday afternoon, Mountain View police found this woman sleeping in her car. She'd been reported missing by her family in Southern California, and her father told police she might be going to YouTube because she hated the company. Okay, so here's what we know already. She's crazy. She hates YouTube. Okay, she put up a bunch of videos on YouTube about being demonetized. She's an animal rights protester with an Islamic background. Her dad is Muslim, I guess. All I can say is that her videos make it fairly clear that she is not an Orthodox, observant Muslim. She's dressed in garb that I don't think traditional Muslims would be particularly happy with. There are a bunch of videos of her doing exercise videos, and she was demonetized. She had about 55,000 followers on Instagram, I guess is the latest. She had a few followers on YouTube, and YouTube cracked down on some of her videos, and she was very angry at YouTube for that. And so her dad called the cops and said she might be going to YouTube. The cops obviously did nothing. So just like in Parkland, the cops were told over and over and over. There was no follow-up. And this person obviously was unwell. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and diagnose this person with anything, but a person who creates these kind of videos, there's a screw loose. Okay, just in conventional terminology, this woman had a screw loose. After this guy, the father, called the police called the family at 2 a.m. Tuesday to say that this woman had been found and that everything was under control. But hours later, this woman was dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound after shooting 3 people and causing an afternoon of terror at YouTube's headquarters. In an interview Tuesday night with the Bay Area News Group, this woman's father said his 38-year-old daughter told her family a couple of weeks ago that YouTube had been censoring her videos and stopped paying her for her content. She was angry, he said in an interview. It wasn't clear Tuesday night what Mountain View police knew about her history with YouTube. A police spokeswoman confirmed that officers had found a woman of the same name asleep in a vehicle early Tuesday morning in a parking lot, and the officers made contact with the woman after the license plate of her vehicle matched that of a missing person out of SoCal. The woman confirms her identity and answered subsequent questions. At the conclusion of their discussion, her family was notified that she had been located. So according to her dad, his daughter was a vegan activist and animal lover. As a youngster, she would not even kill ants that invaded the family home, instead using paper to remove them to the backyard. State records show she had once established a charity called Peace Thunder, Inc., which sounds fantastic, to educate people about animal cruelty, environmental pollution, and other causes. So she's a left-wing activist with an Islamic background, and she was a vegan. And she made weird YouTube videos. And these videos are really weird. And again, I'm not going to show you the YouTube videos because I don't think future shooters should have it in their mind that the media are going to give them the sort of coverage they seek if they go and shoot people. So according to this woman, she was actually quoted by the San Diego Union Tribune at a PETA rally in 2009 outside Camp Pendleton, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And she said, "For me, animal rights equal human rights." She told her family that YouTube had stopped paying her for the content she posted to the site. YouTubers, of course, can receive payment if their videos have been monetized. She was prolific on social media. She posted videos and photos on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. It's very weird. There's strange workout video clips, graphic animal abuse videos, and vegan cooking tutorials. But a bunch of her latest posts show evidence of her growing frustration. Apparently, all of her pages were taken down late on Tuesday. But, for example, in a March 18th Instagram post, she railed at YouTube, quote, "All my YouTube channels got filtered by YouTube, so my videos hardly get views, and it is called merely relegation. This also happened to many other channels on YouTube. This is the peaceful tactic used on the internet to censor and suppress people who speak the truth and are not good for the financial, political gains of the system and big businesses. I recently got filter on Instagram too, and maybe it's related to YouTube, and YouTube staff asked Instagram to filter me here too." And then she recorded a video on January 28th where she was complaining about her perceived discrimination by YouTube. She said, "I'm being discriminated and filtered on YouTube, and I'm not the only one. They restricted my ab workout video, a video that has nothing bad in it, nothing sexual." She has at least 4 YouTube channels, one in English and then others in Farsi and Turkish as well. So the original story that was coming out of the police department is that this was a woman who was angry at an ex-boyfriend, and so she went into YouTube and started shooting up the place. It is now clear, or at least becoming clear, that there's not a lot of evidence for this, that it seems more likely that she had a vendetta against YouTube and she decided to just go and start shooting. The family apparently came to California from Iran in 1996. And apparently, this woman was living with her grandmother, and she was always complaining that YouTube ruined her life. So apparently, nobody knows where she got the gun. It was not a rifle, I believe. I believe that this was a handgun. And that's what we know about this woman. She would have turned 40 in 2 days. And again, she had problems. It's very clear this is a woman who is mentally ill, right? And she said in one video, quote, "They want you to be their sex slaves and not think outside the box they designed for you. Your knowledge is their enemy." This is what she said about YouTube. Her family said she'd been making a living as a YouTube personality. So here's what comes out of this. First of all, the entire left, as soon as the shooting went down, said, okay, this obviously means we must have gun control, because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Every single thing looks like a nail. And in this particular case, the hammer doesn't fit the nail, because it's pretty obvious that this woman had serious problems. It's not clear where she got the gun yet. We don't know the answer. Depriving me of a gun would not have deprived this woman of a gun. At least we don't know that a blanket gun confiscation would have done that. This doesn't appear to have been an AR, and so this isn't going to be top-line news for the media for much longer than 24 hours. It would have been top-line news if this had been an NRA activist. It would have been top-line news if this had been a devotee of the Ben Shapiro show. But since this person is a weird person with mental illness and left-wing leanings and a Muslim background, that means that this is not going to be news beyond, the next 5 minutes. The media is going to bury this one. We'll get right back to Parkland, which has a nice narrative that the media can glom onto, ignoring, of course, all the facts about what happened in Parkland, where the FBI ignored warnings and the local police ignored warnings, and then the shooting happened anyway. So look for this shooting to hit the back pages in about 5 seconds flat, again, because it doesn't promote the agenda that folks want it to promote. The entire left decided that they were going to jump immediately on this as it was happening. And this is one of the problems with social media, places like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, is that people react immediately to all of this stuff as soon as it happens, right? As soon as it happens, people are reacting without reference to reality. So Michael Ian Black is already tweeting he wants to take away all the guns. The comedian is tweeting that he wants to take away everybody's guns. He's coming for our guns. Why? Do we even have the facts? No, we don't have the facts, but the narrative must be purveyed at all costs. And then folks on the right are saying, well, maybe this woman was a religious Muslim. Maybe it's a terrorist attack, based on the initial report that it was a woman in a headscarf who walked in. So nobody actually waits for the facts to come out. It's important to wait for the facts to come out, because if you don't wait for the facts to come out, you screw things up. And in this particular case, the facts demonstrate that, once again, we had a mentally ill person who was basically being ignored by the cops, and the cops didn't do what they were supposed to. Every red flag was there. The police were told that she had a vendetta against YouTube. Now, the other thing that you may see in the coming days is the media try to turn this into a defense of YouTube's policies, suggesting, for example, that this woman was egged on by people who were angry at YouTube and angry at social media, that she was angered because there were so many people on the right particularly who talk about the problems with demonetization of video. Now, in order to get to that point, they would have to ignore the fact that this woman was, in fact, left-wing. I mean, she was rallying with people for the ethical treatment of animals, but that wouldn't stop the left before. The reality is that every time there's a shooting, the left immediately swivels and tries to blame it on the right. This goes all the way back to the JFK assassination, when the New York Times attempted to blame right-wingers for the JFK assassination, even though JFK was assassinated by a communist who may or may not have been in contact with the Cuban government. And they tried to blame it on the right. They suggested it was America's collective guilt. You may see that emerge in the aftermath of the shooting, but now you know what you need to know about the shooter. And again, it's pretty clear this does not fit into the narrative that the left would like from all of this. Now, what would have stopped something like this? Presumably a gun violence restraining order if she obtained her weapon legally. So some of the stuff that Marco Rubio is pushing, right? Some of the stuff that's been pushed by David French over at National Review, the policy that suggests that family and friends could have gone to a judge and said, this woman should not have guns because she's a danger to herself or others. That would have stopped her from getting a gun. What else would have helped? Well, if the police had followed up and ensured that this woman did not have guns after it turns out that she was sleeping in her car and ranting about YouTube. One of the big problems that we have in American society with regard to the treatment of mental illness is we act as though a person who rants crazy things and lives in their car is just exercising normal American freedoms. You don't have the freedom to sleep in your car in public areas. And you don't have the freedom to be deeply mentally ill and a danger to yourself or others. And the ACLU has made a cause, a crusade, out of ensuring that, for example, homeless people get to sleep on the streets of Los Angeles. This person was not homeless, presumably. She was living with her parents, but she clearly had some problems. And when there are problems like this, again, Jared Loughner, the shooter in the Gabby Giffords situation, the shooter in Aurora, Colorado, the shooter in Sandy Hook, the shooter in Parkland, right? All of these people had serious mental health issues, serious mental health problems. Virginia Tech, and there were warning signs, and people didn't do what they were supposed to do. Okay, so how did Judaism ruin her life? It's amazing. Okay. Over almost 7 years and 2 serious relationships with Jewish men who had first said religion didn't matter and then backtracked and decided it did, I've optimistically begun interfaith relationships with an open mind twice, only to become the last woman these men dated before settling down with a nice Jewish girl. This is in the pages of the Washington Post. I can now say with certainty, I am tired of being a Jewish man's rebellion. At first glance, I fulfill the stereotypes of a white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. This woman writes, I'm blonde, often wear pearls, and can mix an excellent and very strong martini. Manners and etiquette are important to me, and when I'm stressed, I often cope by cleaning. I do describe myself as a Christian, but loosely and in the most liberal sense possible, of course, because if you were really a Christian, then presumably you would talk about values while dating somebody rather than, I don't know, living with some guy for 3 years and then realizing that you share no values, and then he ditches you and finds someone with whom he shares values. He says, but if I did find myself falling for someone who did not share my spiritual views, I bring up the subject. If it's going to be a problem, I want to know. That's exactly what I did in my previous long-term relationships, both of which were with Jewish men. And both men said it wasn't a problem that I was Christian, as they considered themselves culturally but not spiritually Jewish. At the very least, they were the most lackadaisical Jews I'd ever met. They never fasted on Yom Kippur or observed Jewish holidays on their own. And when they traveled to celebrate holidays with their families, they made it clear it was an obligation rather than a choice. On more than one occasion in conversation, we laughed about the fact that I knew more about the Jewish faith than they did. I knew having an interfaith relationship could be complicated, and if we stayed together, there would be some difficulties, but I thought it could work. Neither of us were looking to convert the other. We respected each other's faith and culture, and as long as we were able to talk about it, I thought we'd be able to work through any issues that came up. And then she cites a bunch of statistics about interfaith marriages. She doesn't cite the statistic about the divorce rate in interfaith marriages, which is significantly higher than the divorce rate in non-interfaith marriages. So this is always the inconvenient part of the interfaith marriage discussion. You know, I feel this way about interpolitical dating. I was asked recently on a college campuses whether a conservative could date a leftist. I said, you can date him, don't marry him. And I feel the same way about a leftist. Okay, if you're a leftist and you believe deeply in social justice, you probably don't want to marry the guy who's a deep devotee of Friedrich Hayek. It's just not going to go well. You're not going to want to raise your kids in the same way. You're not going to have the same social values. But again, this is what happens when you have a society that is very much focused on sex and very much focused on the surface of relationships, just having fun and going on dates and reading the New York Times together. But there's no real discussion of the kind of future you want to have together other than you want to have brunch on Sunday mornings and read the New Yorker. Okay, if that's your perception of how a relationship goes, you know nothing about relationships. But we're a society that has largely discarded the deeper meaning of relationships, which is rooted in values and purpose. Okay, life is rooted in values and purpose. You want to live a fulfilled, meaningful life? You must have a telos in the Greek terminology. You must have a purpose. The same thing is true of a relationship. Everything you do that is important in your life should have a purpose. If you feel aimless at your job, you don't like your job, you have to have a purpose. If you feel aimless in your relationship, you're not going to like your relationship. Your relationship must have a higher goal or purpose. You're building something together. On my first date with my wife, unlike this lady who apparently waits 3 years to discuss serious questions about religion because it might be awkward. You know, you have to sleep together for a couple of years first and then have the serious conversations just like they do in the movies. On my first date with my wife, we talked about free will and determinism. Okay, first date for 3 hours. And then we talked about how many kids we wanted to have and whether or not we wanted to send our kids to a particular school or a different school. Okay, this is on our first date because we were dating for marriage, right? We were dating in order so that we would be pushing toward the next generation. The purpose of marriage is childbearing and child rearing. One of the things I find so interesting about all of these columns, there is never a mention ever of children. Never. That's the purpose of marriage, by the way. Because if the purpose of marriage is just getting together with somebody that you love and you want to have sex with and you want to live together, then you can love and have sex and hang out with that person without getting married. Right there, you don't have to build anything. You can just live with that person until it becomes convenient or interesting to move on to another person. But when it comes time to commit, people want to commit to people they feel a common purpose with. Okay, but that's not what this lady is writing. She writes about her tense moments in these relationships. She says one of their mothers, she's dating Jewish guys, one of their mothers was extremely overbearing, somehow getting my cell phone number and calling me, asking where her son was. I didn't know where he was, and her calling made me incredibly uncomfortable. I asked my boyfriend how she got my number. He swore he didn't give it to her, and I told him I didn't want this kind of involvement to be part of our relationship. When he talked to her about it, she exploded, yelling, if she were Jewish, she'd understand. I wasn't invited to the seders that his family held, despite my saying I loved attending them with my friends. There were times at church I saw couples worshiping together and felt pangs of jealousy, but I told myself every relationship had its problems, and these were relatively minor. Well, maybe it should have been a hint to you that when you were at church and you saw couples worshiping together, that could be you if you pick someone who has a culture closer to your own. There are important differences between religions. There are important differences between methods of thought and values. Okay? If you want to marry someone and have a successful marriage, You must have a common set of values. The best part of this article is the very end of it. Okay, here's what it says. In the meantime, I'll continue dating and meeting my friends, Jewish and not, to swap Tinder horror stories over drinks. Hopefully, while sipping the cocktail I'm determined to create named A Jewish Man's Rebellion. I'd like it to feature a bourbon base and be garnished with a slice of bacon. All right, Lenny Riefenstahl, calm down there. Just amazing, amazing stuff in the pages of the Washington Post. But again, it says something about dating. In dating for my generation, maybe the boomers on, the focus has been on personal pleasure at the expense of values. And not only that, the focus has been on blaming everyone else except for yourself when you set stupid standards for your own dating. This is her fault. Okay, it's her fault. She picked a guy. It didn't work out.
We will make America great again.